G'day, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Scale Ups podcast. I wanted to chat to you directly if you are a founder at the moment who's maybe going through a bit of a tough period. Maybe you're in a headwinds kind of an environment. And so, what I want to chat to you about today is three metaphors that might help you if you are in a bit of a tough environment, a couple of mindset frameworks, frames of reference that will really help you, and then also a bit of a list of activities, things that you might want to be doing during this kind of period. So from context, I've got a couple of clients at the moment who have hit some headwind type periods, and it is certainly, they are not the only ones. Macroeconomics are a bit tough at the moment. So in circumstances where we've got high interest rates and low returns for companies, a lot of them are taking their money offshore rather than investing in their home country, where they can get better returns on their money. When big companies go into winter periods and they start consolidating, that flows through, of course, to the companies that sell to them. I also have clients that have consumers who are the end users of their product, not businesses. And certainly there are a lot of people in many countries who are coming off fixed interest rate periods. They've got significant amounts of inflation compared to anything they've experienced maybe in the last 10, 15, 20 years. They're dealing with high mortgage rates, which can be quite stressing. And when there's an uncertain economic outlook, it affects people's mindset, so they stop spending on discretionary items. This is obviously not a lesson in economics. I'm just painting a picture for, why it's reasonable for many companies to be doing it a bit tough at the moment. Now, your company may not be one of those, but there are some things that I think will make sense to you here, because the reality is there will always be a tough time that comes. Scale, unfortunately, is never linear. I've never met a company, I've never met a founder, I've never seen a business that has just perpetually grown and grown and grown and grown, never faced a plateau, never had a dip backwards, never had a crisis, never had a consolidation period. I have never seen one. And if you have seen one, I would love to know what it is. Please send me an email. I would love to learn all about that. But I've never seen one. So I want to give you a few things to think about just to help to shape your thinking about this. The first of all is, let me give you a couple of metaphors. Metaphors are always interesting because they're stories and everybody resonates with a different kind of story. So some people really resonate with the idea of business being like a set of undulating hills. So maybe less of a kind of straight up mountain climb, more like a Tour de France. There are some flat periods, usually at the start, where there's a lot of road racing on the ground, no hills. And then there are some short hills, and then there are longer hills. And sometimes when you think you've hit the peak of the hill, all of a sudden you have a plateau. Maybe you actually have a slow descent or a fast descent, but then there's another hill. And you end up with this kind of undulating hills kind of context. And you can't just have fun when you're in the climb, even though the climbs aren't always all that fun. You of course want to get to the peak of whatever that climb is. That's very exciting. And you think the peak's going to last forever. But the reality is there's often a bit of a descent that comes after the peak before you get to the next hill. So if you think about it almost as a set of hills, it's quite natural that there are periods where you plateau. And there are periods where you go backwards or you have to consolidate. So that's one. Some people like that context of like thinking about it like a bike race, right? Undulating hills. I know some people resonate with the metaphor of thinking of business more like a stock chart. If you think about if you're into share trading or, any kind of stock market or the property market, you often hear things like, property goes up 8% a year and shares go up 8% a year. But when you zoom out and you look at these trends over time, so if you look at a property chart over time for the last, 40 years or even 100 years, it will look like a beautiful, slow, perfectly incrementally trending upline. But anybody who's been through a few property cycles knows that is absolutely not what happens. In the same way, if you zoom into the last 6 months or 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, you'll actually see it's made up of a series of sharp up and down spikes. It's a long way from smooth. Same thing with share trading. If you zoom into any of those charts and you look at the last day, the last 30 days, the last 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, you'll see it's made up a whole bunch of sharp up and down spikes. It is a long way from smooth. But the further you zoom out, the more smooth and beautiful it gets. But what do you see over time? You see a kind of slow incremental gradient upwards, but filled up with all of these peaks and troughs. And everybody, of course, can forget that peaks are often followed by troughs. When you're in the middle of a peak, you think the sun's going to shine forever. So some people like to think about it like a stock chart. Okay, it's natural that it goes up and down. Some people like the idea of business being more like seasons. Either think of seasons like a feast and famine style of season, or winter, spring, summer, autumn. So if when you think about a feast and famine style mindset, it's like when the feast is on, you just got to go for it. Like when the tailwind is there, the feast is on, you're like focused on sales and marketing and growth, and you're eating and you're feeding people and you're excited, you're sharing it around and everyone's just going for it. But then you end up with these little transition periods. But what you ultimately end up in after a feast is a famine period where you buckle down, you optimize, you reduce wastage, you prepare, you're more thoughtful. Or if you think about that in the context of winter, summer, spring, summer is the feast, like everything's on, sun's shining, everyone's out there having fun. And then there's a change, right? There's this autumn period where the leaves start to turn, the leaves go brown, the weather starts to cool down. And then all of a sudden, you end up in a winter and it's a bit cold and it's a bit gloomy and it's a bit rainy and you miss the summer and you're wondering if summer's ever friggin' going to come again. But you've got to remember that what comes after winter? Spring. Sun comes back out. The ground softens up. You got to be ready to plant seeds. The flowers will come back out. The things start to grow again. You're going to head towards another summer or another feast period. So whichever metaphor, whether it's one of those three or some other metaphor that you got, I'd love to hear about it if you've got some great metaphors that help you when you go through consolidation periods. What do you do tactically during this period? I'm going to come back to mindset at the end, but what do you do tactically? Well, this is the time to be shedding costs or people that aren't working. Now, that sounds a bit brutal in terms of shedding people, but this is your consolidation opportunity. When you are in the famine period, the winter period, the descent, the down part of the spike, I don't care what you want to call it, you need to be managing cash flow carefully, fine-tuning profitability, focusing on your customer relationships, keeping them happy, investing in them. I would also encourage you, in general terms, wherever you can, to keep investing in marketing. You may reduce it somewhat, but don't just turn it off completely. It's really hard to get started again. And there is going to be a season where things return to growth. So if you've turned everything off and you've stopped everything and you've stopped all your spend, you might find it quite difficult to get back in the game or to come out of the gate swinging when the gates come back open. Prioritize system building, platform building, sharpen the saw. This is an amazing period for you to prepare for your next growth phase. This is also a great opportunity if you've got that under control and you've done those kind of key things. Oh, sorry, one other thing is I would remove distractions. Sometimes this is one of those periods where during summer, you've added a whole bunch of things like bells and whistles and new product ideas, new service ideas, and you're trying out a million things. When you're in winter or you're in the famine, it's time to get rid of those things, like press pause, press stop, go to the things that make money, go to the things that create profitability and cash, like consolidate. That is what consolidation is, but it's about consolidate first and then think about how do I make sure this platform is well optimized so when the tailwind comes back, I am ready to rock. So one other things that I often suggest people do is this is a great time to step back and look at strategy. Spring is going to come back. So what are the things that we could be doing now or exploring now that if we were to invest in them now, I don't mean necessarily invest financially, but invest our time, our effort, our resources, our people. If we had some capacity during this period and we were going to put it towards something, what 2 or 3 things would we want to start investing our time in whilst everybody else is licking their wounds and got their head in the sand and just waiting for this thing to go away, waiting for the storm to pass? We want to be active. This is a very active period. It's not a sleepy period. Yeah, it's not a bury the head in the sand period. It's an active period. We are remodeling, re-optimizing, but we can be investing time in things that are not urgent, but are important in the long-term strategic initiatives that in 3 years' time, if we focus on them now, will give us a much more competitive advantage, a much bigger competitive moat in 3 years' time because we invested whilst we were in the difficult trading period. So, a couple of mindsets. Above all, regardless of which metaphor you like or which one ever resonates with you, 2 things that I want you to think about in this period. The first, especially, by the way, if you are feeling overwhelmed, disappointed. I know it's disappointing when you hit these periods because you think everything's going great and you are set up for growth and you're such a genius. Growth's just going to continue regardless of what happens in the market. Doesn't always happen like that. So it can be very frustrating as an owner or a founder. So 2 things I want you to keep in your mind. The first principle is you have to zoom out in these periods. When you zoom out, like we talked about with the stock chart, zoom out. What it allows you to do is to see beyond. It allows you to get out of the emotion of now, of the here and now and the urgency and the pain and the sort of suffering. It allows you to see the before context when everything was going well. And it also allows you to imagine the future context. And when you look back at the before context, you'll see there's been a whole bunch of these kinds of seasons that have happened before, either in your industry, in your business, with peers that this is a normal part of the cycle. It also allows you to see your progress over time. So you can actually reflect on how much you've actually achieved to have got to today and to have the foundations that you have right now. We always feel calmer when we're zoomed out, and we always make better decisions when we're zoomed out because we're not trapped in the urgency and the pain that we might be experiencing right now. So principle number 1, zoom out, regardless of the metaphor. And principle number 2, you have to remember, and I saw this on a YouTube video with what's his name? Tom Hanks. I think Tom Hanks, like Wilson and the volleyball. Tom Hanks has been in a million things. I don't need to explain who Tom Hanks is. And somebody was asking Tom Hanks, like, if you could kind of go, like, what's the most important thing basically you've ever learned in your life? And if you could have gone back and taught your 20-year-old self, what would you have taught yourself? And he said, which I just love this, this too shall pass. When you're feeling overwhelmed, disappointed, frustrated, just remember, this too shall pass. And when everything is absolutely on, when you are in the heat of summer and you are feasting and you are going for it, you're doing sales and marketing, customer acquisition, everything's amazing, you feel like you're on top of the world, remember this too shall pass, even when it's going awesome. Time is such a powerful healer, but all of it passes given the context of time, which is the power that you realize when you zoom out because you get a greater context of time. So remember, no matter what is going on right now, this too shall pass. So what's the worst thing that you can do during this period? The worst thing you can do during this period is to bury your head in the sand or try to sleep your way through it or just hope that it goes away. In winter, you need to be active. You need to be working. You need to be excited. Like, you need to be engaged with it, embracing it, making the most of it, relishing it, enjoying it, because this is your time to prepare for the next stage of growth. You might see a retraction, but this is your consolidation period. You need to come out with a stronger, more refined, better quality, more, like leaner, stronger team ready to face the next, because there's going to be another phase of growth. It's going to happen. So this is your opportunity to engage with it and embrace it rather than have it be a painful experience. It may be painful still, but it's your opportunity not to waste it. You've got to remember, you are the only person, you can't, if this is a macroeconomic kind of external factors kind of a season, then you can't control that. But what you can do, and the only thing you can absolutely control with 100% certainty, is what you make it mean to you and to your team. And how you decide to engage with this period will shape how your team engages with this period. How they feel about it and how they engage with it will determine what actions actually happen and whether you'll have a stronger business at the end of it or whether you won't. If you are finding this a difficult period, if it's really getting on top of you, then of course, please, if you are suffering mental health challenges as a result of the period you're going through, please immediately call Lifeline. There is support. It's very important to talk to people. Talk to people. That is the most number one high priority principle. If it's not at that stage, but you're just finding it difficult, then don't waste it. Go get them. Make the most of this winter period. Harvest it. Sorry, not harvest it. That's completely the wrong term. Engage with it. Use this opportunity to have a stronger business. Go get them.